So, as we thought about the entire day and we thought about creating the first discussion, we wanted to really be realistic and say, okay, well, what do people really have on their mind? And certainly if they were paying attention to last year in Vietnam, really they want to talk about banks. They want to talk about what happened in financial services. And so we're very privileged. To my left here is Huy Tran. Huy joined ACB in 2002, is currently the chairman of ACB, one of the leading private banks in Vietnam. Actually, if you follow VOF, our flagship London-listed closed-end fund is the #1 holding in VOF as well. And so what we wanted to do in the next half an hour or so is really get an understanding from you about what's going on in financial services, what's going on in banking. We'll revisit a little bit of last year, but want to be forward-looking. And so first question, I'll give you the mouse here, is many attendees who are certainly familiar, or those of us that live in Vietnam know ACB very well, but there's probably some folks that are coming from overseas that may not know ACB. So maybe explain who ACB is and what you're all about.
Great. I'll be very quickly. So ACB, well, our story, last June we just celebrated our 30th anniversary. So probably we are one of the last banking license issued in Vietnam 30 years ago. So over the last 30 years, what we've done, comparatively, if we're looking at the 10 years journey, our profits are increasing about 16 times. So last year so one slide ahead. All right. So last year we bring in about 17 trillion. It's a large number, a lot of zeros conversion to USD, but right now the rate, I think Michael touched something about, right now it's about 24,000 maybe, 24,000 dong a dollar, maybe a little bit more, 24 and a half. Total assets is over 600 trillions. Loans to customers is about over 400 trillions. Our number of customers has increased significantly over the last few years. Right now we close to around 6 million. Branches, we are a nationwide banks with 384 branches, over 13,000 staff. So some of the business highlight that we've seen is that of course the profit, what makes VinaCapital happy is that of course we bring in pretty decent profits, over 17 trillions. The interesting part here is that our ROE is sustainably over 25% for a number of years, and we continue to achieve probably above 25% for the foreseeable future. And why maintain our NPLs below 1%? So we are probably one of the lowest banks in the country that have the lowest NPL, and one of the highest one that have the highest ROE. So we probably crack that secret of low risk and high returns model. So hope to maintain that in the foreseeable future. And so recently we signed the bancassurance deal. That's probably the landmark deal in Vietnam in the recent history, and we are one of the largest players in the retail banking.
To give that some perspective, and this isn't from the prep, so we're already going off script. Give that perspective. How big was the bancassurance deal? Just so everybody understands how big the bancassurance market is, and how much companies want to be a part of ACB.
Well, so we are one of the last player to go into this bancassurance deal. It's been over 20 years, and we just signed a deal in the last 2 years. All the major players is in Vietnam. I think I'm by confidentiality to not disclose the actual number, but I would say significantly higher than the next in line.
And was the next in line over $200 million for a 10-year exclusive?
Yes.
Okay.
So give or take double that. Yeah.
So more than double the $200 million deal that was public.
Yes.
So someone paid over $400 million to have an exclusive relationship with ACB to sell bancassurance.
Correct, yes.
Okay. And so I think it just shows the power of financial services, and also, as we'll talk about, the growing middle class and the affluence in Vietnam.
Right. Okay. And I think it's interesting, it's not just a number, but we are probably when that bancassurance deal signing, there was, I think, 15 of 17 players in the market. Now they bring up to the number 5. So we're the #1 bancassurance within 3 years. So that's really speak to the middle income class, the urban professional demographic in Vietnam.
All right, so now we'll go to the harder questions. So, last year the challenges in the corporate bond market, primarily the real estate developers, had a huge negative impact on the market and investor sentiment. Do you believe the worst is behind us, and are there still problems that need to be solved?
Well, opposite to Michael, he has a crystal ball that he can see 10, 20 years down in the future. I'm just using today weather analogies today. Most of you have experienced rainy day, pretty gray. We don't know what's going to happen this afternoon. Hopefully, it's going to be some sunshine. And I think that is reflective of today market conditions. It's that there's still certain uncertainties foresee. But I think the worst is probably behind us, just because the issue has been there. Everyone know about it in the country. So my view is that it's actually a welcome correction that we've seen in the last year, late last year and early this year. Now, whether the worst are actually behind us or not depends on how we're going to work through that problem over the next 6 months or so. Because when you're talking about corporate bonds, a lot of it has come due this year and next year, and how that's going to be restructured and how that's going to be absorbed into the economy. Now, keep in mind, a lot of those corporate bonds are being sold to retail investor. Institutional investor, there's the sophistication there, so that's not too much of concern. But a large number of that was being sold into the retail, and there's a lot of the issue was mis-selling as well. So with that unraveling and how to, I would say, partially as the banks, the corporates are resolving that issue will help to clear up the air for the second half of the year. Yeah.
And so, from the banking perspective, obviously, we were invited here to talk about ACB, but also as kind of as a proxy for banks. Do you think most banks are in a healthy position?
Well, interestingly enough, you're going to see a divergence of the players in the market. For us, we think this is a great time because we find that a lot of our competitors are being distracted because certain concentration risk, borrower lending in the past few years, over-leveraging in the economy. So with a lot of problem that playing out in the financial industry, I think some of the player will be fairly busy this year and next year. So we find that there will be an opportunity for a few selected players to pull ahead. Interestingly enough, when in other market you see state-owned commercial banks probably being equated with probably I would say less stringent risk model, but actually in Vietnam we find that they're a very strong player, robust risk management system, robust manager as well. So they probably enjoy some benefits coming in the.
So you say some of the banks are distracted. Can you be more specific on like what those issues might be?
Well, first of all, I've spoke briefly, is just the concentrated risk. So a lot of the loans book that they have are fairly concentrated in a few players. There's a lot of, I would say, interested parties playing in those sectors as well. So a lot of the exposure in the real estate markets, which later today we're going to hear about. So with that over lending or concentrated risk, I think that's going to take some time.
And so, during our prep discussion, we talked about the overall economy improving. What we heard this morning from Paul and from Michael was that while the worst may be behind us, your view sounds like the first half of the year, 24, might be okay, but realistically, you're looking for a bigger recovery. Second half of the year, are there certain catalysts that you're looking for or metrics that you'll be evaluating?
Again, going back to what Michael has presented earlier, we are the export-driven economy. A lot of it is FDI heavy. So what we've seen is we're watching the number and the recoveries of the business that taking the orders from overseas. And right now it's still slow. Some industries start seeing more orders, but others, the majority, are still seeing very small number trickling. So we're definitely going to want to watch that orders, whether it's going to coming in more so over the second half of 2024, and then we'll see whether the economy will pick up that. Yeah.
And do you also think about, to the extent that there's a credit quota, do you think about, are you getting closer to it, or is that a leading indicator, so to speak?
I would say, it's regulatory framework here is, I would have to give the credit to the SBV. They're fairly responsive. So they fluctuate. I would say flexible into our credit growth and the room that they given to the financial institutions depends on the market, whether they see that the credit is being absorbed into the real economy or not. So currently right now there's still, I would say, control, tightly centrally. But we've seen, given the last few years, toward, say, the third or the fourth quarter, if they see the economy need more credits pumping into the economy, they will relax that a little bit. So far this year, we haven't seen that being absorbed into the economy yet. Because, of course, it's a weaker demand from the SME business that's looking for more orders from overseas.
Have you seen a recent pickup in the amount of loans, or is that still slow?
Well, see, first quarter is very slow. I think for the first time in 10 years when I became chairman, we've seen the negative growth. Second quarter, we start seeing some pickup, and third quarter is a good recovery. So we're counting on the fourth quarter. We're measuring that, how quickly that pickup. So you're looking at the GDP growth, first quarter, let's say, there's more or less, a little bit over 3%. Second quarter is a little bit over 4. Third is a little bit over 5. So given Vietnam is always achieving its state target, we expect that fourth quarter will be somewhere in the 6.
All right. So obviously things are picking up, but here's one of those challenging questions, which is, this is a business question, not a personal question. What does keep you up at night?
Well, I think playing in this market, and we're talking about technology here, is of course cyber risk. That's the prevalence risk to today banking industry. And the second thing is always about the NPL, the loans. There will be a periods where it needs correction. There's prolonged overlending. I think this is a bit hot in the last few years, so it needs certain cool down periods to make certain corrections.
So you're at 0.7%,
Yeah.
so less than 1%. And is that really kind of, if you think back to, you started being chairman 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, I suppose.
Yeah.
Is that a lot of it kind of either regulatory change or internal policies that ACB has implemented that has resulted in a more conservative posture?
It's interesting when you say you use conservative. For us, we're looking when other players in the market are thinking we're one of the most conservative banks in the industry. What we're looking at is our risk appetite, our culture, what we see in the market, how we've been able to differentiate ourselves with other players is that we'll see the market maturity. Let's say there's a reason why we're the if not the only one player that's not involved in the corporate bonds market. It's just because we're looking around and we'll see the market sophistication is not there. The depth is not there. The regulatory framework is not in place. So that's why we steer clear of that even 3-4 years before this became an issue last year. So that's, I think, is more to our risk appetite and what we view in the markets as a whole, and because our nature is we focus more on the retail market, so it's more diversified risk.
Okay, terrific, thank you. And so what are the biggest opportunities for ACB the next 5 years? Is it growing out a stronger priority segment? We see banks locally introducing private banks. Some banks are taking on international strategic partners. So as you think, if it's 2023 today, if it's 2028, you look back and you say, here are the 3 or 4 things that we targeted that we achieved.
Well, we have 150 people here that's interested in Vietnam, so we're always looking for strategic partner as well, and we will have a very good return. So that's something that is in consideration. But I think the opportunity for ACB is we are very well placed in the market today. We are retail driven. The large number of our customers are urban professionals, so we well distribute in the main cities in Vietnam. And for the longer growth, it's Vietnam demographic that Eric, you've seen earlier today with Michael that touched on is very well placed in the Asian country. So we're riding on that wave and we are well positioned.
So you didn't really talk about priority banking, private banking?
The urban professional, as you say, I wouldn't say it's priority banking. Everyone is playing in that space right now. But I would say it's not the 80-20 formula. We haven't seen much of the profit coming out of that, and less so for private banking. when I touched on earlier about corporate bonds, I'm talking about the market sophistication. So I think for the mass market, the market sophistication is not there. So it's still fairly in the early state, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for the players to develop the market and providing the financial service and products for that space.
And how do you think, when we talk to banks, one of the big themes, and we haven't really discussed this much, is the focus on digital transformation, or the combination of in-service service and then app service. How do you think about that? Do you want, if it's mass affluent priority, is it about servicing through digital, through an RPB, or both?
Okay, so digital banks apps is not a competitive advantage anymore. It's I would say a ticket to entry in the banking world today. So when we're talking about digital channel for our customer, we're looking at the term that we use internally is mass customization. So we have to be able to customize to each and every one, about 6 million customer or so. So that is the journey that we've been trying to do in the last 3 or 4 years. So we're working with other players, not just with the banking industry, but other in e-commerce, social media. So it's more of an ecosystem play when we're not trying to build an all-powerful in-apps, the super apps, but rather connect with other players.
So everybody wants something that everybody else wants, but they want it just for them. Yeah, very, very easy. So one of the things that banks have been challenged with is other banks have been asked by the SPV to step in and support the struggling banks, which are called zero dong banks. Will ACB be asked to do this, and if so, would you?
Well, we have about 100 million people populations, over 30 banks, and some foreign banks. So you could probably say it's a bit crowded place. And in the recent years, I briefly say about it's a diversion of the players in the market. So we're definitely going to see some banks that will need help, and we are part of the industry. We one of the players. So we're going to try to provide as much help as we possibly can when the regulators ask us to do so. But at the end of the day, what we're looking at, and probably make VinaCap happy, is that the shareholder value is what is most important to us. So we're definitely going to carefully looking at that, whether that's going to add value to our shareholders in the long term, and make the decisions.
Well, thank you. And so here we are. We have a little clock right here. And so intentionally, we have a half an hour, but we did about 20 minutes of Q&A to leave 10 minutes for the audience. I'm very comfortable with that. I hope
yeah,
you
sure,
are as well. Okay. And so what I'd like to do is, Tom, if there's some microphones here, if there's some questions for Chairman Hui, that would be wonderful. Except for from Chris, but okay.
Thanks. Your insights were fantastic. Property. So property has caused problems in the banking sector in the past. I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about that and how ACB stands and the future of property as a percentage of your loan book, and what your expectations are for the banking sector within the property market.
For the property, there's I would say, differentiation between playing in the property market. Whether you lend to the developers predominantly on your loan books, or you lending to the actual buyer, the secondary markets. So for us, for our loan book, we more so on the individual. So there would the fluctuation. There's property for the last few years, we'll see the increase of 20 or 30% per year. So that's people making a lot of the gains in that even individual. So when there's a certain downturn in the market, we'll see, of course, people haven't been able to service their loans. But the mortgage term here, interestingly, is different than the Western market. It's usually 20 or 30 years. People tend to pay off their mortgage 5, 7 years here, even though we provide 20 years. Mortgage. So when we evaluate our customer, we lend out about 70% of the actual property values. But quickly, when you see about 3 years down the line, they pay more than 50%. So even when there's a market correction, the risk is relatively low. When we are playing more on the mass market, When it's a concentrate in a developer loan book, that probably would be a bit of an issue when there's a downturn.
And so as you were thinking about earlier, the banks that might be distracted by certain concentration risks, specifically without naming names, it was those that have related parties that are real estate developers.
Correct, yes.
Okay, which is, I think, your question, Chris. All right. Additional questions?
I have one.
Okay.
So you touched on consolidation of the banking sector. Is Vietnam overbanked? Are we going to see banks merge together, particularly some of the state banks?
State banks would be, I think it's an intricate questions, and we don't expect in the near terms, per se. For other privately held, the key question is the shareholder. The zero-down bank is more or less easier to answer, but when there's the actual M&A based on the market valuation, it's extremely difficult to see. We followed that trend for the last 5 years, and we haven't seen any deal that's emerged from the actual market-driven factor. So,
yeah, so I'll ask it differently. So one of the things that surprised me when I started working a lot with banks is that I think the population or percentage of people with bank accounts, depending upon the research, is either 30% or 60%. But let's say it's 30%. Would you agree, something like that? But most people, so Vietnam is underbanked. So there's probably too many banks, but yet as a population, it's underbanked. And then most people have relationships with 3 or 4 banks. And so as you think about your growth trajectory, is it becoming primary with your core client, or is it about growing your 6 million base to 10 million as that emerging middle class grows?
we are looking at the middle class players. So we've seen more middle class coming into the market. So that's the square demographic, and it's also the touches that they're more focused in the cities as well, on the urban area. So it's overcrowded. We see a lot of traffic issue. You know, some of the photo that I've shown. And so that market driven is really concentrated, and we'll see that is a healthy growth for Vietnam, at least in the next 10 years.
So will we see your branch network expand in the satellite cities?
Not necessarily, no. We are at the critical mass. We will see 380, probably get to 400 or so, but it's not going to be 500, 600, 700 branches, yeah. Interesting.
And so you had mentioned you don't think the super apps are your competition. Who are the, and I know we have some friends here for some banks, who are the banks that you also respect? You say, these are my healthy peers, my healthy competition.
Vietcom banks, it's very well run. It's one of the state-owned commercial banks, and it's just, I would say, they are relatively new to the SME market and the retail markets because they tend to concentrate more on the corporate business, but they very well play in that space, yeah.
Yeah, interesting, okay. Other questions from the audience? And by the way, I know many of you, and you ask me plenty of questions when we're one-on-one, so I'm a little bit confused how all of a sudden there's this shyness that's never apparent. Okay, well, any closing comments before we have a coffee break then?
Well, it's great to attend an investment conference like this. It's definitely see the bright future for Vietnam, and we've seen all the interest globally going in. So I think that's a very exciting time ahead. Yeah.
All right, well, Chairman G, thank you so much for joining us. For everybody.